The King is to lead his first Order of the Garter service at Windsor Castle this afternoon, but one royal excluded from the historic procession for the second year running.
Prince William takes action at Garter Parade after Camilla is caught red-handed, targeting Catherine. Okay, take a look at this for a moment. What began as the final, carefully controlled minutes before the Garter Parade was about to turn into a reported palace crisis, when Catherine was allegedly singled out in an encounter that left her visibly shaken, and Prince William was told that Queen Camilla was at the center of it. Now, watch this. This was not being whispered about days later, after the carriages had gone home and the doors had closed. According to the dramatic account surrounding the incident, the tension was already building inside the royal preparations, with staff members exchanging looks, conflicting explanations beginning to circulate, and Catherine standing at the center of a situation William reportedly refused to dismiss. And that is what makes this different. The question was no longer whether an awkward royal disagreement had taken place. The question was why Catherine had allegedly been singled out just moments before one of the most visible ceremonial events on the royal calendar, and what someone may have hoped would happen before the cameras began rolling. If the reports surrounding this moment are even close to the truth, then William was facing a choice in real time: protect the appearance of calm, or stop and ask why his wife had suddenly become the focus of something palace officials appeared desperate to explain away. Hi viewers, if you saw someone deliberately trying to humiliate your family, would you stay silent? That was the question hanging over the room as William turned toward the officials gathered nearby. Outside, Windsor was preparing for spectacle. Inside, according to the account now being reconstructed, something had already gone wrong. The Garter Parade was supposed to move with the kind of precision that left no room for confusion. Positions were arranged. Staff were moving through corridors with instructions in hand. Security personnel were preparing for the arrival of senior members of the royal family. Ceremonial details were being checked again and again. Everything had a place. Everything had a time. And yet, somewhere inside that carefully ordered machine, Catherine had reportedly found herself at the center of an encounter that no one seemed prepared to describe clearly. The first version of events was vague. There had been a misunderstanding. Nothing serious had happened. There was no reason to interrupt the preparations. But William, according to the story surrounding the incident, did not accept that answer. Not when Catherine had reportedly emerged from the encounter, visibly unsettled. Not when staff members who had been nearby suddenly seemed unsure about where to look. And not when the name connected to the incident was Camilla.
We do know that Camilla had told friends at this point that she was surprised at the unexpected side to William that she had found. The boy's got a temper, she apparently said. One of them was born to be king. The other came to the royal family late in life.
For several seconds, the room reportedly fell into the kind of silence that was more revealing than any explanation. No one rushed forward with a complete account. No one appeared ready to say exactly what had happened. Instead, fragments began to emerge. One person had seen part of the exchange. Another had noticed Catherine leaving the area. Someone else reportedly knew that there had been a discussion before William arrived. But the accounts did not fit neatly together. That was when the atmosphere changed. William had entered the situation expecting to prepare for a ceremony. Instead, he was now trying to understand why the people around him seemed more concerned with controlling the situation than explaining it. The difference mattered. A misunderstanding could be settled. A mistake could be corrected. But an attempt to bury the truth before the public ever saw what was happening was something else entirely. According to the account, William looked from one official to another and asked the simplest question in the room: what happened? The answer did not come quickly, and that delay reportedly told him more than the first explanation had. Catherine remained composed, but there was a difference between composure and comfort. Those closest to her had reportedly noticed it. Her expression had changed. Her attention had shifted away from the ceremony. Something had happened that she had not expected, and William was beginning to understand that whatever it was, the people responsible for managing the event wanted the matter contained.
I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it. That's the bit that excites me.
Camilla's representatives, according to the disputed claims surrounding the incident, maintained that the situation had been misunderstood. But William was not interested in a polished statement. He wanted the sequence. Who had been present? Who had spoken first? Who had entered the area? And why had Catherine been left looking as though something had just happened that no one wanted to discuss? The clock kept moving. That was the pressure no one could escape. The parade would not wait forever. Guests were arriving. The public was gathering. Cameras were ready. And every passing minute made the decision in front of William more difficult. If he pushed too hard, the private tension could spill into the public event. If he did nothing, he risked allowing the entire matter to disappear behind palace doors before anyone had answered the most important question. Was Catherine deliberately targeted? The possibility alone was enough to change the mood. Because if that was what had happened, then this was no longer about a personal disagreement between members of the royal family. It was about whether someone had attempted to manipulate the circumstances around Catherine at the very moment she was preparing to step into one of the most watched royal ceremonies of the year. And according to the account, there was something else. A detail, small at first, easy to miss, but troubling enough that one member of staff reportedly hesitated before mentioning it. Something connected to the preparations had changed. Not publicly. Not with an announcement. Quietly. The kind of change that could easily be dismissed as routine if no one decided to look closely. William noticed the hesitation. He reportedly asked the official to repeat what had just been said. The room became still again. That was when the situation stopped feeling like a disagreement and started feeling like an investigation. Because the official had not simply described what happened to Catherine. The official had suggested that something may have been arranged before the encounter even took place. And suddenly, the timing became impossible to ignore. Catherine had not walked into an ordinary moment of confusion. Something had reportedly shifted around her shortly before the ceremony. Something involving the arrangements. Something that had created the conditions for the encounter that now had William demanding answers. The question was no longer only what Camilla had allegedly done. The deeper question was who knew about it. Because royal events do not operate on improvisation. There are schedules, positions, instructions, layers of staff, people responsible for knowing where everyone is supposed to be and when. So if something had changed, someone had authorized it, or someone had made sure it changed without attracting attention. That possibility began spreading through the room without anyone needing to say it aloud. William did not raise his voice. According to the dramatic account, that was what made the moment more unsettling. The louder the tension became around him, the quieter he appeared. He reportedly asked for the people who had been present. He asked for the sequence of movements before Catherine entered the area. He asked who had spoken with her, and he asked for any communication connected to the last-minute preparations. That was the moment several officials reportedly understood that he was not going to let the ceremony swallow the story. Not this time. Outside, the sound of preparations continued. Doors opened and closed. Footsteps moved along the corridors. The machinery of the Garter Parade kept advancing toward its scheduled beginning. But behind those walls, William had effectively drawn a line. The appearance of unity could wait. The truth could not. And that was where the pressure began turning toward Camilla. Until that point, the story could still be explained as confusion, a tense conversation, a clash of personalities. a moment taken out of context. But if the arrangements surrounding Catherine had been altered before the encounter, then the situation became much harder to dismiss. Camilla's side, according to the competing accounts, continued to reject the idea that she had deliberately targeted Catherine. That denial became part of the tension itself, because William was reportedly receiving one version of events while staff members were quietly describing another. And somewhere between those two versions was the truth. The problem was that time was disappearing.
I think more shock and dauntingness was more of the feeling I felt, but it was, the thing is, I think I was on such a high anyway, and so was Catherine about George, that
One senior aide reportedly urged that the matter be dealt with after the parade. It sounded reasonable, at least on the surface. The guests were waiting. The public knew nothing. Why risk turning a private problem into a larger crisis? But that suggestion carried another implication. If the matter waited, what could change? Would memories suddenly become less clear? Would messages disappear? Would witnesses begin to doubt what they had seen? William reportedly understood that delay could become the easiest way to make the entire story vanish, so he refused to move on. And with that decision, the mood inside the preparations changed again. This was no longer a request for reassurance. It was a demand for clarity. The people around him began reviewing what they knew. One staff member reportedly described the final minutes before the encounter. Another gave an account that placed Catherine in a location she had not originally expected to be. Then came another inconsistency, a communication. Not a complete answer, not yet, but enough to suggest that Catherine's movements had become part of a discussion before she was even aware of it. William reportedly looked at the information for several long seconds. No one interrupted him. Catherine stood nearby, still composed, but now watching the same process unfold. There was something deeply unsettling about that moment. The person who had allegedly been caught in the middle of the incident was being asked to wait while others explained why it had happened. And William appeared unwilling to let anyone turn that into a technical problem. This was personal. Not because he wanted a public fight, but because, according to the account, he believed Catherine had been placed in a situation she had not chosen and then expected to carry on as if nothing had happened. That was the point where his response became more than anger. It became action. He reportedly instructed officials to preserve the information connected to the incident. No assumptions, no selective summaries, no convenient version prepared for later. He wanted the full sequence, the witnesses, the communications, the arrangements, everything. And then, according to the account, one final detail emerged. A staff member who had remained silent through most of the discussion finally spoke. The person reportedly described seeing something shortly before Catherine's encounter, something that had seemed insignificant at the time. But now, with William asking questions and the pieces beginning to connect, it looked very different. The staff member said there had been a change, not after Catherine became distressed, before. William slowly turned. The ceremony was drawing closer. The officials around him knew that whatever happened next could not simply be undone. And for the first time that morning, the possibility began to take shape that Catherine's encounter had not been an isolated moment at all. It may have been the result of something already set in motion. If someone had changed the conditions around Catherine before she entered that room, then the next question was unavoidable. Who made that decision? And why? If you believe Catherine deserved answers instead of silence, then like, share, and subscribe, because the next part follows the trail backward to the moment the arrangements began to change, and that is where this story reportedly gets far worse. The answer William needed was not waiting in the room with him. It was buried in the hours before Catherine ever appeared unsettled, before the officials began contradicting one another, and before anyone realized that the arrangements surrounding the Garter parade might hold the first real clue. To understand why William refused to let the matter go, the sequence had to be traced backward. Earlier that day, Windsor had been operating under the familiar pressure of a major royal occasion. The Garter parade demanded precision. Every arrival had a schedule. Every movement had been planned. Senior staff were responsible for ensuring that members of the royal family reached the right places at the right time. Catherine had been expected to move through that system like everyone else. But according to the account being pieced together, something changed before she reached the area where the disputed encounter later took place. The change was not announced publicly. There was no visible commotion. No alarm was raised. That was precisely what made the detail important. One staff member reportedly noticed that Catherine's expected route had been discussed again shortly before the final preparations. Another person remembered instructions being adjusted. At the time, neither detail appeared serious enough to challenge. Royal schedules changed. Rooms changed. Security routes changed. That explanation could have ended the matter. Except Catherine was later left visibly disturbed, and William was now asking whether the earlier changes had created the conditions for that encounter. The timeline suddenly mattered. Who first suggested the change? Who approved it? Who knew Catherine would be directed there? Those questions became difficult because the answers were no longer consistent. One account reportedly described the adjustment as routine. Another suggested it had been made after a private discussion involving senior staff. A third person remembered being told that the change should not delay the ceremony. That last detail caught attention. If the adjustment was ordinary, why was there concern about whether anyone questioned it? The closer officials looked, the less comfortable the explanation became. At the center of the growing dispute was Camilla. The claims surrounding her role remained contested. Her representatives reportedly maintained that the incident had been misunderstood and that there was no deliberate attempt to target Catherine. But the questions being raised inside the palace were becoming more specific. Not whether tension existed, not whether Catherine and Camilla had always occupied a complicated position within the public imagination surrounding the royal family. The question was, what happened on that particular day? And more importantly, what happened immediately before Catherine found herself in a situation she had apparently not expected? The pressure on the staff increased as William's request for a complete account began moving through the chain of command. Nobody wanted to be the person who had ignored an important detail. Nobody wanted to be caught repeating an explanation that later collapsed. So memories began returning. A conversation, a message, a change in direction. An instruction that had seemed routine until the larger picture began to form. Catherine's movements were now being reconstructed minute by minute. The deeper they looked, the clearer one fact became. She had not simply wandered into the disputed encounter. Her presence there had followed a sequence of decisions. That did not prove intent, but it created a problem for anyone trying to dismiss the entire situation as an unfortunate misunderstanding. Because misunderstandings usually become clearer when examined. This one was becoming more complicated. There was also the question of who had witnessed the encounter itself. The first staff member had reportedly seen only Catherine's reaction afterward. Another had observed part of the exchange but could not hear every word. A third person remembered the atmosphere changing when Camilla entered the area. No single witness had the complete picture. Together, however, their accounts created a pattern that William could not ignore. Catherine had reportedly been singled out. There had been a tense exchange. She had left unsettled, and before that moment, her movements had changed. That was enough to keep William digging. The Garter parade was approaching, but the ceremony was no longer the only thing being prepared. A private review was now taking shape behind the scenes. Staff members were asked to check instructions connected to Catherine's movements. Officials began comparing what had been said against what had actually happened. The purpose was not to invent a scandal where none existed. It was to establish the sequence before memory, pressure, and competing loyalties distorted it further. And then came the first serious break in the story. A staff member reportedly recalled seeing communication connected to the change in arrangements. The message itself was not immediately presented as proof of wrongdoing. It did not contain a confession. It did not openly state that Catherine should be targeted. What made it significant was the timing. It appeared to have been sent before Catherine entered the area. That meant the movement of people around her may have been discussed in advance. William's attention reportedly shifted at once. Until then, he had been dealing with testimony. Now, there was the possibility of a record. A trail. Something that did not depend entirely on who remembered what after the tension began. The question became whether the communication still existed in its original form. That created a new urgency. If officials had been exchanging instructions connected to Catherine's movements, then every message could matter. A simple phrase could explain the entire sequence. Or it could expose an attempt to make an ordinary adjustment look more innocent than it really was. This was where the atmosphere inside the palace reportedly began to harden. The people involved were no longer dealing with gossip floating through a corridor. William was asking for records, and records had dates, times, recipients. That made them harder to dismiss. For Catherine, the situation carried a different weight. The account does not suggest that she demanded a public confrontation. Instead, the tension surrounding her position became more visible through what she did not do. She did not turn the ceremony into a spectacle. She did not rush to answer every rumor. She remained present while others attempted to establish what had happened. That restraint became part of the pressure on William. If Catherine was expected to carry on with composure, then he appeared determined to ensure that her composure would not be used as an excuse to ignore what had taken place. That distinction mattered. Silence could be mistaken for acceptance. William reportedly refused to make that mistake. As the review continued, attention returned to the disputed encounter. What had Camilla allegedly said? What had Catherine been told? And why had the interaction occurred at that particular point in the preparations? Here, the accounts became more difficult. The exact words were not consistently described. That meant the story could not rest on a single dramatic line. Instead, the tension came from the circumstances surrounding the exchange. Catherine was allegedly placed in a position where she was separated from the expected flow of preparations. Camilla was reportedly present. The encounter followed a change in arrangements. And afterward, Catherine was visibly affected. Those were the pieces officials were trying to fit together. Then another memory surfaced. Someone had reportedly questioned the change before it was carried out. At the time, the concern had been dismissed because there was little time and the ceremony was moving closer. That small objection now looked different. It suggested that the adjustment had not been completely invisible. Someone had noticed. Someone had wondered why it was necessary. And someone had apparently decided not to press the matter. William now had a new question. Who dismissed the concern? The answer was not immediately clear. That uncertainty pushed the investigation into a more dangerous direction. Because if the change had been questioned and then brushed aside, the issue was no longer only about the encounter between Camilla and Catherine. It became about the people who had allowed the circumstances around that encounter to develop. That was when the palace system itself entered the story. Senior staff were responsible for maintaining order. Ceremonial officials controlled movement. Security personnel monitored access. Assistants carried instructions. Messages passed through several hands. For something to change without attracting attention, someone had to either approve it or fail to challenge it. William reportedly understood that. He was no longer searching for a single person to blame. He was trying to understand the chain, and the chain was beginning to lead somewhere. The more the sequence was reviewed, the more one particular period stood out. The minutes before Catherine's encounter. There was a gap, not a missing hour, not enough to cause immediate alarm, just enough time for something to happen between the adjustment of her movements and her arrival at the disputed location. Officials reportedly began focusing on that gap. Who had been there? What instructions had been issued? And why did one account of the sequence differ from another? The answers were uncomfortable. One person claimed the change came through the normal process. Another reportedly said the instruction had arrived unusually late. A third could not explain why the expected arrangement had been altered at all. William was listening. And with every contradiction, the possibility of simple confusion became harder to defend. This was also the point where Camilla's position became increasingly difficult to separate from the larger story. There was still no complete answer. There was still disagreement over intent. But the allegation that she had deliberately targeted Catherine could no longer be dismissed without examining the events that led Catherine into that encounter. The background of the day was becoming the evidence, not proof of guilt by itself, but context. And context was exactly what the first explanations had failed to provide. A major royal ceremony creates pressure for everyone involved to keep moving. That pressure can become dangerous when something goes wrong. There is always a reason to wait. Wait until after the event. Wait until the guests leave. Wait until the headlines disappear. But according to the account, William was beginning to see waiting as the easiest path to forgetting. And forgetting was not an option. That was when another piece of information reportedly reached him. It came from someone who had been close enough to observe the preparations, but far enough away to avoid the first wave of questioning. The person had not initially understood the importance of what they saw. Now, after hearing that Catherine's movements were being examined, the memory returned with unsettling clarity. Before Catherine entered the disputed area, there had reportedly been a brief private exchange involving the arrangements. The staff member could not confirm every word, but one thing stood out. Catherine's name had been mentioned. William reportedly stopped the conversation. That detail changed the direction of everything. Until then, the possibility existed that Catherine had simply been caught in a chain of poor decisions. But if her name had been specifically discussed shortly before the arrangements changed, then the question of intent became impossible to avoid. Who was involved in that conversation? What was being planned? And why had Catherine not been informed? The official who heard the account reportedly understood the seriousness of the implication. The parade was getting closer. William was getting closer to the truth, and somewhere inside the palace, the person or people responsible for the change in Catherine's arrangements may have realized that the questions were no longer going away. That was when the story took another turn. A communication connected to the preparations was reportedly located. The contents were not immediately revealed, but its existence was enough to send officials searching for the original sequence of instructions. The message had a time, and that time placed it just before Catherine's route changed. William looked at the record. Then he looked at the people around him. Nothing more needed to be said. The atmosphere had shifted again. The problem was no longer whether there had been tension between Catherine and Camilla. The problem was whether someone had taken steps before the encounter to place Catherine exactly where she could be isolated. And if that was true, then the incident William had first walked into was only the final part of a story that had started earlier. Much earlier. The next step was obvious. They had to find out who sent the instruction. And once that name was connected to the sequence, the Garter Parade would no longer be the only event that mattered. William did not wait for the next explanation. The moment he finished reading the message, he reportedly made a decision that changed the entire direction of the morning. The information suggested that whatever had happened before the Garter Parade might not end when the ceremony began. That was enough. Until that point, William had been demanding answers. Now he was preparing to prevent the next move. The exact meaning of the message remained disputed. It did not openly state that Catherine was about to be targeted again, but according to the account surrounding the incident, its timing and connection to the earlier changes were serious enough to make William believe that doing nothing carried its own risk. He reportedly looked toward the officials responsible for the final arrangements. Then he gave a direct instruction. No further changes involving Catherine were to be made without his knowledge. The order was simple, but inside a tightly controlled royal operation, it carried enormous weight. The people around him understood immediately that William was no longer treating the earlier incident as an isolated problem. Every movement now mattered. Every instruction mattered. Every person approaching Catherine became part of a situation under close attention. The Garter Parade was minutes away. Outside, the atmosphere was completely different. Crowds were gathering. Flags were moving in the breeze. Guests were taking their places. The public was waiting for the familiar image of royal tradition. No one watching from outside could see the pressure building behind the walls. That contrast made the moment even more tense. One world was preparing for ceremony. Another was trying to determine whether someone had attempted to manipulate what that ceremony would look like. And standing between those two worlds was William. He reportedly had enough information to be concerned, but not enough to explain every unanswered question. That created a difficult choice. He could force an immediate confrontation and risk acting before the full sequence was established. Or he could allow the ceremony to begin while making sure that no further changes could be carried out unnoticed. William chose control. From that point forward, the arrangements around Catherine were reportedly placed under direct review. Officials who had previously been moving through the preparations with routine confidence were suddenly being asked to confirm instructions. Who had issued them? When? And for what reason? The answers were now being checked before actions were taken. That single change had consequences. The usual speed of the preparations slowed. People who expected instructions to pass without questions were suddenly required to explain them. And according to the account, that was when the first signs of panic began appearing. Not publicly, not dramatically, but in the small reactions people could not completely hide. A pause before answering, a hurried conversation, a staff member leaving one room and returning with a different explanation. William noticed. He had spent enough time around palace operations to understand when people were moving normally and when they were trying to catch up with a problem. Something was happening. The question was whether it was connected to Catherine. Camilla, meanwhile, remained at the center of the allegations surrounding the earlier encounter. Her side reportedly continued to reject the suggestion that she had deliberately targeted Catherine. That position remained part of the story. There was still no public admission, no confirmed explanation that resolved every contradiction. But William was no longer waiting for one. He had shifted his focus. The issue was no longer what anyone was willing to admit. It was what the sequence of events allowed them to do next. And that was where his action became more visible. According to the account, William requested that the final ceremonial positions be checked against the approved arrangements. Not casually, line by line. The decision sent another wave of tension through the staff. If someone had attempted to alter Catherine's movement earlier, then the official arrangement for the parade could reveal whether another change had been planned. The documents were brought forward. Officials compared the versions. At first glance, nothing appeared dramatically wrong. Names were listed. Positions were identified. The order of movement was clear. Then someone noticed a difference. It was small, almost insignificant, but it involved the space around Catherine. William reportedly asked for both versions to be placed side by side. The room became quiet. There it was, a discrepancy. One version reflected the expected arrangement. The other appeared to create a separation, not enough to remove Catherine entirely, but enough to change who stood around her and how she would move into position. That was the moment William's suspicion hardened, because this was no longer based only on a tense encounter and conflicting witness accounts. There was now a practical change connected to the very area of the ceremony where Catherine was expected to appear. Still, the central question remained: who had made it? One official insisted that the version had been updated during the final preparations. Another said no approval had been requested. A third reportedly claimed that the difference had been noticed too late to explain immediately. William did not accept that. The parade was about to begin. There was no longer time for a slow internal review. He reportedly ordered the original arrangement restored, immediately. That was his first unmistakable act. Catherine would take her expected position. No unexplained adjustment would stand. No one would quietly move her somewhere else and call it routine. And if anyone disagreed, they would have to do so openly. The instruction was carried out. For the first time that morning, the direction of events had changed because William had stepped in. But the situation was not over. The earlier message still had to be explained. The missing senior aide still had to be located. And the question surrounding Camilla's alleged involvement remained unanswered. Then the aide was reportedly found. The person had not disappeared from Windsor. The aide was in another area of the preparations. When informed that William wanted answers, the response was immediate. The aide reportedly asked whether the parade had already begun. That question raised fresh concern. Why did the timing matter? William was told. He did not wait. The confrontation reportedly happened away from the main ceremonial areas, where the sound of preparations continued in the distance. William asked about the instruction connected to Catherine's movements. The aide initially repeated the explanation that had already been given. Routine adjustment, final preparations, no deliberate attempt to isolate anyone. But William now had the records. He had the earlier message. He had the conflicting versions of the ceremonial arrangement. And he had witness accounts that placed Catherine's name inside discussions before her route changed. The explanation was no longer enough. So he asked again, who gave the instruction? The answer reportedly changed. Not completely, but enough. The aide admitted that the request had not originated with the person who passed it along. There had been another conversation, another source, another level above. That admission was one of the most important moments of the morning, because the chain was no longer hidden behind routine procedure. Someone higher up had influenced what happened. William demanded the name. The account surrounding the confrontation becomes less certain at that point. Different versions describe hesitation. Some suggest the aide refused to directly identify the person. Others claim that the name was implied rather than spoken. But according to the story, the direction pointed back toward Camilla's circle. That did not end the dispute. It intensified it. Camilla could still maintain that she had done nothing deliberate. Her representatives could still insist that the encounter had been misunderstood. But William now had enough reason to believe that the changes around Catherine deserved immediate attention, and that was exactly what he gave them. The final preparations were temporarily disrupted while the discrepancy was addressed. That was the action. Not a shouting match, not a dramatic public accusation. Control. William reportedly used the authority available to him to stop the unexplained changes before they became part of the ceremony. And for the people who had expected the event to move forward without questions, that decision was a serious problem. Because every moment William spent examining the situation created another chance for the truth to emerge. The public still did not know. The crowds outside continued waiting. The cameras remained focused on the coming parade. But behind the scenes, the crisis was reaching its most dangerous point. Then came the detail that reportedly changed the entire investigation. A staff member reviewing the final movements noticed something about the time attached to the disputed instruction. It had been issued only minutes before Catherine was redirected. That alone was concerning. But another record showed that Camilla's movements had also been discussed during the same period. The two sequences overlapped. The timing created a new possibility. Catherine's route had changed. Camilla's position had been discussed. And shortly afterward, the disputed encounter occurred. William reportedly stared at the sequence. For several seconds, no one spoke. The connection was not proof by itself, but it was enough to explain why the earlier changes could no longer be dismissed as unrelated. This was the point where the title began to take its full meaning. William was taking action because the incident involving Catherine was no longer standing alone. It was connected to the preparations, the arrangements, the communications, and now, possibly, to a sequence involving Camilla's own position before the parade. The question became impossible to avoid. Had someone attempted to create a situation in which Catherine would be placed at a disadvantage while Camilla's position became more prominent? That was the allegation now hanging over the preparations. It was explosive. It remained disputed, but William had reportedly decided that the risk of ignoring it was greater than the risk of confronting it. If Catherine had been deliberately targeted, then silence would not protect the family. It would protect the person responsible. That became the principle driving his next move. He instructed officials to maintain the original arrangement and prevent any unauthorized adjustment from taking effect. He also reportedly made it clear that the review would continue after the ceremony. Nothing would disappear. Nothing would be forgotten because the cameras were waiting, and no one would be allowed to use royal protocol as a shield from questions. If that was true, then the pressure had now shifted. Earlier, Catherine had been the person left dealing with an unexpected situation. Now the people who had shaped the arrangements were being asked to explain themselves. That reversal mattered. For the first time that morning, the person with the greatest control over the situation was not the person trying to influence the arrangement. It was William. The parade was finally about to begin. Officials moved quickly to restore order. The original positions were confirmed. The unexplained discrepancy was removed. Catherine was placed exactly where she was expected to be. And then came another moment that reportedly caught the attention of those watching closely. As the senior royals prepared to move, William positioned himself beside Catherine. It was a simple action. It required no announcement. But after everything that had happened, it carried a message. She would not be isolated. Not before the ceremony, not during it, and not afterward while the unanswered questions remained. Catherine reportedly stayed composed. That composure, however, no longer meant the matter had been forgotten. Behind the formal expressions and ceremonial preparation, the investigation was still alive. The missing explanation still existed. The earlier message still had to be traced. And the connection between the disputed changes and Camilla's circle still required answers. The parade began. From the outside, the royal family appeared to move according to tradition. The public saw ceremony, order, control. But according to the account surrounding the incident, the real story was still unfolding beneath the surface. William had stopped the first unexplained change. He had restored Catherine's expected position, but the final revelation had not yet arrived. Because the information that had been uncovered about the minutes before the ceremony raised a far more serious question. Someone had apparently known what was about to happen, and someone may have expected Catherine to walk directly into it. William was not finished. The parade had begun, but the investigation had reached the point where the next piece of evidence could finally expose who knew about the plan before Catherine became involved. And that was where the entire story was about to turn. If you believe William was right to stand between Catherine and anyone who may have tried to push her aside, then like, share, and subscribe, because staying silent now only helps the people hiding behind the unanswered questions, and the final chapter is where the truth behind those last minutes reportedly comes into full view. The parade was already moving when the most important question finally found its way back to William. Someone had known enough, early enough, to make Catherine's altered position possible. And if that was true, then the incident that began as a tense private encounter had never been only about a few uncomfortable minutes behind palace walls. According to the account surrounding the event, the next piece of information emerged after officials began comparing the final records against the earlier instructions. The difference was not dramatic on its face. It was a sequence of times, names, and movements that appeared ordinary until placed beside one another. Then the pattern became harder to ignore. Catherine's route had changed. A discussion involving her position had taken place. Camilla's movements had been reviewed during the same period. A disputed encounter followed, and the later ceremonial arrangement contained a discrepancy that William had personally ordered removed. The question was no longer whether every detail could be explained separately. It was whether they could still be explained together. One official reportedly identified the missing link. The instruction affecting Catherine had not appeared from nowhere. It had followed a private exchange between people connected to the final arrangements, and the record suggested that one of those conversations had been relayed toward Camilla's household. That did not amount to a public finding of guilt. The claims remained disputed, and Camilla's representatives could still argue that awareness of an arrangement was not the same as ordering it. But for William, the discovery reportedly crossed an important threshold. There was enough to justify action, and that was exactly what the title had been pointing toward from the beginning. Prince William had not acted because of a passing rumor. According to this account, he acted because Catherine had been visibly affected. The explanations around her kept changing, and the evidence trail suggested that decisions involving her had been discussed before the confrontation ever occurred. That was when the accounts became even more uncomfortable. And the deeper the review went, the clearer one point became. Catherine had not been the person creating confusion. She had been placed inside it. That distinction changed the emotional center of the story. If anyone watching believes that a powerful person should never be allowed to hide behind status while someone else is expected to stay quiet, then liking, sharing, and subscribing becomes more than support for this story. It becomes a refusal to reward silence when questions still need answers. The pressure now turned toward the disputed role of Camilla, the timing, the altered arrangements, the discussion involving Catherine, the overlapping movements, the tense encounter, the changing explanations. Each point alone could be challenged. Together, they created the reason William had refused to let the matter disappear. Camilla's side could continue to reject the allegation that Catherine had been deliberately targeted. But William reportedly no longer needed to settle the entire argument in the middle of the ceremony to take protective action. He had already done that by restoring Catherine's position and blocking further unexplained changes. The final question was what happened after the investigation reached its conclusion. According to the account, William's response was not built around public humiliation. That was the difference. He did not need a loud confrontation to make the point. He had the arrangements reviewed. He preserved the records. He prevented the disputed changes from continuing. And he made it clear that Catherine would not be expected to absorb the consequences of someone else's decisions simply to protect appearances. That silence carried its own message. For Catherine, the most important outcome was not a dramatic speech. It was the fact that she was no longer standing alone inside a situation others had tried to define for her. William stood beside her. The ceremony continued, but the unanswered questions did not vanish. That was the strongest twist of all. The event everyone had been preparing to watch was never the only stage. The real struggle had been happening before the public saw anything. By the time the parade began, William had already made his move. He had stopped an unexplained change. He had restored Catherine's expected position, and he had refused to let urgency become an excuse for forgetting. That did not settle every rumor. It did not prove every allegation. But it changed what could happen next. And that mattered because the entire crisis had begun with one dangerous possibility: that Catherine could be isolated, unsettled, and then expected to carry on without anyone asking why. William asked, then he acted. The final images of the day reportedly carried a different meaning because of everything that had happened before them. William and Catherine appeared together, moving forward with the ceremony completed, but the private questions still unresolved. There was no need for a public declaration. The action had already spoken. Catherine was not moved aside. The unexplained arrangement did not remain in place. And the people connected to the decisions were now facing questions they had reportedly hoped would never reach this point. William's reported response drew a boundary. Catherine's composure was not permission. Her silence was not consent. Whether every disputed allegation will ever be publicly resolved remains another matter. But the central action was clear. When William believed Catherine had been placed in a position that required immediate attention, he reportedly refused to stand back and hope the problem would disappear. He stepped in. And once he did, the entire sequence began to unravel. The unanswered questions became harder to bury. The people involved faced scrutiny, and the story moved from rumor toward a documented sequence of decisions that demanded explanation. So the final question belongs to the audience. Was William right to act immediately, even with the Garter parade moments away, or should Catherine have been expected to endure the ceremony and wait for answers afterward? Because that is where the story leaves its deepest mark. Doing nothing would have been easier. Saying nothing would have protected the schedule. Moving on would have protected appearances. But according to this account, William chose Catherine over convenience. And for those who believe no one should be pushed into the shadows just because another person has more power, the response is simple. Do not reward silence. Do not let the questions disappear. And that is why the next story matters too. When powerful people believe attention will fade, scrutiny becomes the one thing they cannot control or comfortably escape for long. Like this video, share it, subscribe to this channel, and turn on notifications, because standing by while Catherine is pushed aside only gives the opposition more room, and the next story coming to this channel is even more explosive.